Uh, I'm particular. How we framed. It's just funny with the mirror. Cool. So here we are. Hi, everybody. Joe Moore, CEO of Psychedelics Today. Jon Dennis, attorney in Oregon, right?
Attorney, yep. Also consultant with Psychedelics Go.
Right. What is Psychedelics Go?
Psychedelics Go is a psychedelics consultancy.
Yeah. Eventually, I'm hoping to play a part of Psychedelics Go. Not yet. So today we are here to talk all about Oregon 109. And I guess let's start with defining what that is.
Yeah, so Oregon Measure 109 is Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, and it essentially is a regulated adult use psilocybin law that will allow people to take psilocybin under the supervision of a licensed and trained facilitator at on site at a licensed facility. During the campaign, they talked about it as a kind of a therapy initiative, psilocybin therapy. But as it's been coming out more and more in the board and in the text of the measure itself, it's not really, doesn't seem to be highly therapeutic in the sense that it's not people who are therapists or people with master's level degrees that are offering the services or being the facilitators. They're people with high school diplomas. The minimum barrier to entry for a facilitator is just a high school diploma. So,
well, with all this training, that's a little bit TBD. And we were discussing it, and I was impressed by the amount of hours they're planning to train these folks with, relative to, what I was thinking was like 5 hours of training.
Yeah. I think the thought now is it's going to be about 125-hour training program. So, yep. And, so it's really more of supervised adult use than it is therapy, although there's nothing in the law, of course, that would prohibit like a therapist from actually, off being a facilitator and doing that as part of their practice. But so there's a lot of really interesting things about the measure. It's the first of its kind. It's 71 pages long, and it leaves a huge chunk of the rules and the rollout to this 2-year development period where the Oregon Health Authority, along with the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, work together to come up with basically, the particular details of how that's going to shape up. And the advisory board started meeting in late March, and so they've been going for 7 months or so now, and they've been having lots of discussions about what this might look like in terms of the ethical rules, in terms of the types of things that are going to be allowed at a facility, in terms of the things that may not be allowed, the types of facilities that might be allowed, and so on. So we're well underway in these discussions to launch the program.
Didn't we see some things like there was room for like outdoor use and possibly with interesting live music, and like the rules were actually pretty slight, it seems to me. I thought it was going to be kind of mimicking the MAPS model where everything was controlled.
Yeah, so I guess I should have started this with the disclaimer, of course, that even though I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, and none of this is legal advice, and you shouldn't interpret any of this as legal advice.
I'm not a doctor either.
Neither legal nor medical advice will be offered in today's program. But the thing about, so, and also everything that the board is talking about is only recommendations that, of course, the Oregon Health Authority will take under advisement and decide what to do with that. So I want to kind of pump the brakes just a little bit and say this is all sort of, it's too early to say for sure exactly how this is going to turn out. So take all this sort of with a grain of salt. But yeah, so the to your question, Joe, about whether music's going to be allowed, that remains to be seen. What we do know is that the subcommittees generally have been supporting group administration sessions. And there's talk about how many facilitators will have to be present for how many clients. And so far, the kind of talk or recommendation seems to be settling around 3-to-1. The way that is right now, that's 3 clients to 1 facilitator for group sessions. And that's, it may not basically, it doesn't depend so far on the dose. So whether people are taking 5 grams or whether they're taking a 1/4 gram, the current proposal is that it's the same ratio. So how that might affect live music, and we don't actually know yet exactly what types of activities are going to be allowed. Although interestingly, there's been talk, actually one of the board members, the chair of the licensing subcommittee was talking about VR as being something that will probably be allowed, kind of psychedelic virtual reality while on psilocybin for therapeutic or
It's something we haven't even really begun to research yet. And I think there's a lot of promise there. So I'm happy they see it and they're still allowing for it because, this is going to be a global situation. I would say within the decade. And Oregon could have a lot of software. Like I think Oregon's trying to be smart about this and say, what other things can we do well for our people by allowing for certain things downstream? So I really kind of appreciate that. And I wonder if they're taking that kind of view generally around business too.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of talk that we generally know that Oregon's the first place where this is happening, and so we want to make it a business friendly kind of space where kind of I don't want to say experimentation, but there's space for innovation and for products because none of this has really been done under the light of day before. So there's talk now about what types of products are going to be allowed and whether there's adjuncts, whether people, it seems like they're probably going to allow chocolate bars and different kinds of admixtures like that. But
right, and novel products too. I think we're going to see things in Oregon that we've never seen in the recreational market. Legacy market. And it's going to be interesting. Like I could see transdermals, like even vapes, nasal administration.
There's a company in Oregon that has recently, I believe, gotten a patent for a nasal administration already.
Super interesting. Now, like if we're able to do transdermals, you could do small dose transdermal, so leading towards things like microdosing, though perhaps more effective, right? Because you have a steady state of it at a low dose in your blood versus, once every other day or something.
Yeah. So one of the key pieces of the measure is that all psilocybin has to be purchased and consumed and experienced on site at the facility. So it's not going to be like a home use, paradigm. So, to the extent that microdosing may be allowed, I don't think there's anything that would say a client of Psilocybin Services has to take at least 1 gram or more. So, presumably there could be people who take, microdoses, but they have to be done on site. And it's not clear yet whether there will be rules that offer kind of lower barriers to entry for people who are taking it kind of for those types of purposes. But
so did you see? So after the people of Oregon passed this initiative, did you see some pushback somewhere from groups saying like, hey, this should be something that's regulated through the FDA?
Yeah, so there's been quite a bit of news about that. And I want to first say, I've just read the articles, probably the same ones you have, Joe, and all you out there listening. So none of this comes from firsthand knowledge on my part, but there was apparently some emails, I think Vice reported on this, between folks at Compass Pathways and professors at OHSU that this ought to be an FDA-driven process and that to leave it up to the voters. It's not, if this is a medical process, why are we making that something that voters are choosing rather than the doctors and researchers? So, they got a lot of obviously negative feedback for that. And, I don't think there's been much in the way of, I don't actually think that the efforts to do that have been to stop the program or limit its rollout have really been very successful.
Right. It seems like that halted for sure. That was definitely a big splash for a minute there. And it was awkward. And I'm glad we kind of transcended that to say, wait a second, like democracy still kind of counts in some places. So you did it, people. Nice work.
Yeah. Well, and California has its adult use measure that's out right now. They're out trying to gather signatures. I haven't heard any updates on that, but I can imagine that after basically Oregon kind of surprised everybody. I don't think a whole lot of people that weren't close to the measure really thought it was likely to pass. So now that it's passed, I think everybody realizes these are passable measures. So I think in the future, there's probably likely to be more kind of organized and funded opposition to these sorts of initiatives. But Oregon, I think, was kind of lucky that we only had one kind of statement against the measure that got printed in the voters pamphlet, and that only got, it was a significant one from the Association of Psychiatrists. And so that, that was obviously kind of a big,
kind of a conservative institution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. It was kind of awkward to see, but it makes sense. Like doctors are trying to do, doctory things to cover, what they might see as an ethical issue. But what they're not necessarily seeing is the decades, if not centuries, millennia of safe use, which is hard for doctors to see because they're reading medical journals, not history books necessarily.
Yeah, well, and I think that we're kind of in a process of redefining what we think of as wellness and medicine. And medicine doesn't just mean getting prescribed, pharmaceuticals from a doctor. Wellness and medicine also includes walks in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of this. And I think that we're kind of undergoing a pretty big cultural shift right now.
Absolutely. So for those of you writing in the chat, we're gonna dedicate the last 15 minutes to questions, and just sit tight, and we'll definitely get to them. Also, this will be recorded and posted online later, so you'll see it on YouTube and all that other fun stuff. So I'm seeing that there's allowances for facilitation, manufacture, grow. The fact that it's not just a mushroom play is phenomenal, because some people just can't stomach psilocybin containing mushrooms at all. I've recently tried some of these extracts, and they are way gentler on the body. Like nausea was like 0 for the amount that I consumed. It was pretty cool. So I think there's a lot of hope for these new products.
And that's they actually recently, the products subcommittee recently made the recommendation that, and it seems like it's probably going to happen, that in the early kind of rollout of the program, that synthetically derived psilocybin is not going to be permitted unless it's just extracted from a kind of a mushroom source or some kind of fungal source.
That's pretty cool, man. So we have like allegedly pure isolate coming down the pipes, which is phenomenal. So what's that, like somewhere around 15 to 25 milligrams would be a functional range. I'm sure people could consume more if they wanted, but it's like it's just a phenomenal move.
And eventually that's part of the whole business piece, that as these are new industries that are just emerging now. We don't have very many kind of people who manufacture synthetically derived psilocybin, but there'll be an opportunity to do that probably, my guess is within a couple of years in Oregon.
So John, so you've been watching this a lot. Have you joined any committees? Like, I know you're at most of these meetings watching and participating, but what has your role been largely?
Yeah, so I just watch, and I've been giving increasing amount of public comment. There's public comment available at the end of most meetings, and I've been kind of cautious or conservative with making them, certainly initially, and as time goes on, I've been weighing in a little more, in part because Oregon is the first, and so it's just, I think, extra critical that we get it right. Because if we don't, then everyone that follows Oregon's path is probably going to similarly, I mean, there's other, like California's law doesn't really closely model Oregon's law, neither does Hawaii's, but
yeah, they're wildly different, which is really nice to see.
yeah, that is nice. But I think the majority of psilocybin, initiatives that have been released, like Iowa, Maine, and Florida, all of those are very closely mirrored after Oregon to varying degrees. But so it's important, I think, that we get it right. And I'm not on any kind of official committee, but I've just been kind of an observer and trying to just participate and make sure that there's people eyes on it, and that it's not just people who are these kind of career type of psychologists, that there's and that's not to say that the people who are on the committee, like, none of them are part of like the psychedelic community, but because I think most of them are to some extent, but that it's just more that we kind of democratize it. I think that's part of one of the reasons that I wanted to do this program, is to just bring that, like, the conversations to the public in a format that people don't want to just sit around and watch, like, several board meetings every week.
Right.
A way that they can kind of be aware. And then, as I'm sure as these conversations evolve here, there will be parts of that can, again, weigh in on the process and influence and help make sure that it rolls out in a really good way.
So John, brain fart, come on. Wow, that was pretty cool. So still lost, but there's so much to talk about in relation to this. All right, I got it back. And nobody's talking about it. Like, there's not much media coverage. And what we decided was that we need to do something on a regular basis, updating everybody about this. And this is the inaugural episode of that. I think we've got maybe 2 more attorneys that'll be joining us, which would be amazing to have other, legal perspectives and feedback. Because, people are trying to now plan their lives. Like, a lot of people are moving to Oregon because this is perhaps a more interesting career than becoming like a career maps therapist or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are a lot of people moving, and I've talked to a number that are, a friend of mine, Joshua Pritikin, he moved all the way out from Virginia to right after the measure passed to get his feet on the ground. And I mean, there's a lot of folks like that are moving, and all of us are just hoping that this program rolls out really, really well. And yeah, it's really kind of shocking to me that, given the kind of historic import of this process that we're going through, that there's been basically nothing reported in any media about it. I mean, there was they call it the rapid evidence review that the board released in late July, the final version. And it, there was a little bit of press around that, some of the findings and conclusions that the board had made on the review of the available medical data. But beyond that, there's not been really very much reported on it. So, as we're, kind of deciding like how, what our psychedelic future is kind of going to look like, and granted, this isn't the end of the conversation, but it is the start of it in a certain sense. I mean, of course, that's, for us in the West, there's obviously, centuries of indigenous use that have a lot to bear, a lot of wisdom to bear on this discussion. So it's not like this is brand new stuff, but in terms of, the industrial Western kind of world, this is our first real go at it in a way that it's going to be kind of operating with government sanction and license. So
it's going to be fascinating. Yeah. Now, is there room for religious stuff, or is this still debated?
That is a very, very interesting question. I was talking with Gary Smith about this recently on one of his episode I did.
Psychedelic Alex is what it's called, or?
I thought it was Psychedelic Alex. No, just but yeah. So the question is, I mean, it's pretty clear that Oregon couldn't discriminate against a religious institution that applies for a psilocybin license. So if a church applies and says we want a psilocybin license, clearly Oregon Health Authority can't say no. So that's pretty much pretty solid. Like, so what is unknown in my view is whether there's other rules that would have to be either granted or relaxed to make special allowances for different types of religious practices, particularly with the federal RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. What the kind of intersection is there, and I think Gary and I don't agree entirely on that, but I think that it's clear that a religion that uses psilocybin as its sacrament can become licensed and can get established, and at some point may be able to even sue the federal government as the Santo Daime Church did also in Oregon, and as the UDV Church did for ayahuasca. And if they can prove that they're to the court satisfaction that they're a bona fide religion, and that they're that the federal law is an undue restriction on their right to practice, then they could conceivably potentially export that religion into other states outside of Oregon,
Right.
once they've got that kind of stamp of approval from the federal government.
That's pretty interesting. I like that. Yeah, this is you and I did a series, I think, was it over the course of last winter we did that?
Yeah. Around
religious freedom in America, and what are unicorn cases that some lawyers would look for to bring. I'm gathering that these are kind of like lifetime projects. If you get to run and like successfully complete a case in the Supreme Court, like that's kind of a life goal for a lot of attorneys, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it's also probably a life nightmare for some too. It'd be a lot of work, but a lot of really good that could be brought to the movement in terms of just establishing the validity of psychedelic sacraments for religious practice, for sure.
Yeah, and there's just so many different perspectives and angles on this, and a lot of work left to be done. I'm hopeful that at least the Native American Church will get eased up on by the feds in the next couple of years. Like the fact that they, there are only a handful of peyoteros, like roadmen, that they can, legally harvest.
Yeah.
Like that's insane for a whole religion. You like two guys.
Yeah, and I think, and I apologize, I'm gonna butcher these numbers, but it's something to the tune of like several 100,000 members of the religion, and then I think like 3 or 4 licensed peyoteros, and
it's incredibly small numbers.
And I think there's been like a couple of them who have retired or maybe died or who aren't doing it anymore.
And largely the licenses are only in Texas, I believe, too.
All of them are, yeah.
So like that's kind of brutal when you then have to do interstate transit, and I'm sure they have allowances for this given their religious affiliation, but it's a really sad situation for a lot of reasons. And IPCI and other groups are doing some really great stuff around peyote restoration, so that's really cool. But really, the Fed should have nothing to do with that, especially as it relates to the Native American Church. I'm sure Decrim Nature has some other thoughts on that, and you're welcome to write to me, guys, whenever you want to debate that. But yeah, it's interesting. And fungus, we don't have that problem at all. Like psilocybin containing mushrooms, it's just, they scale really well. You can grow it on all sorts of things.
And within a couple of months from start to finish, and like peyote, it's 10 years.
10 plus, it's nuts. And a couple months at most. I famously have grown in the past. I really wish I could still grow, but can't given some legal issues. Having a profile on the internet being one of them. And, it's a really interesting process, and I hope people in Oregon can at least go check out grows, maybe volunteer some time at a grow in exchange for a session. Things like that could be kind of neat.
Yeah, I thought it would be pretty cool if, so far I haven't heard anything that would prohibit a grow from having kind of like, obviously for contamination reasons, you wouldn't want people just tourists walking through a grow, but
They'll have to have all the clothes on.
yeah, right. That might be pretty impractical to do that on
Right.
a large scale, but if there could be some kind of like viewing room where people can watch.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Now, what kind of rules do you know about in relation to grow and manufacture? I heard rumor that you can't advertise your products.
Yeah, so the measure itself states that the Oregon Health Authority may prohibit the advertising of psilocybin products to consumers, basically. It doesn't mean that they have to. And there's nothing in there that really would allow the health authority to prohibit advertising psilocybin services. So, and so the difference, of course, is, you know, I'm either advertising, you know, this is my brand of mushroom product versus here's my retreat center. We offer products, you know, or, you know, we offer psilocybin sessions. So some of the discussions and the subcommittees have centered around what are the risks in advertising, and you know, obviously you don't want to target to minors and things like that, but and you don't want to, if somebody's contraindicated, you probably don't want to try to target those folks. But the discussions in the subcommittees, they haven't really recommended yet that they prohibit advertising products directly to consumers, which is interesting, in part because, you know, people may have different, you know, physical limitations or health limitations that, you know, maybe they can't, like you were saying, Joe, they can't maybe eat a full mushroom for whatever reason with the nausea, or, you know,
it could even be allergies too. There's so many different compounds in these mushrooms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of room for inclusion here.
Yeah, and that of course supports the argument that we ought to have a really robust products market that offers, you know, different products to different people with different needs, and you know, particularly the hospice kind of patients who will be taking this. And that's, you know, some of the early studies were focusing on you know, terminal cancer patients. And, you know, they have a lot of they frequently have a lot of different limitations on how they can, what they consume. So, you know, you think about people who are extra vulnerable and delicate kind of, and, you know, we ought to have something that allows them to get treatment too.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, just think about people with cancer who can't keep anything in their stomach. People with, you know, without a stomach, like there's people that are on a tube that might be able to get some help. Yeah, there's so many people that we can bring in that really need some help. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm just like endlessly fascinated. So you mentioned minors. Is there anything around, like, what's the lowest age?
21. Gotta be 21 plus to either take or facilitate, or pretty much any kind of psilocybin license that will be available is 21 plus. I think that's true of testing too, although I'm not sure. So those are the 4 basic kinds of licenses. You have the service centers, like the, you know, I call them retreat centers, but the measure uses the term service center. And it encompasses more than just a retreat center. It would probably also encompass more medical type settings, and like you're saying, possibly also churches. And it, you know, so there's the service center operator's license, there's the facilitator's license, there's a manufacturer's license. The manufacturer's licenses will have different types of endorsements that come with it. You know, they may be just the straight, you know, growing mushroom license. There's extractor's license. There may be, you know, making different food products, or, you know, topicals, or whatever they end up deciding to allow. Kind of sub parts to that piece, and then the testing licenses. So there's the 4 big ones, the four licenses. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I want to start addressing some of these things. So it looks like we have a lot of comments here. We'll start with this one on 12-step here. So that's going to be, you know, up to the people in 12-step. 12-step people don't think drugs are a part of the 12-step, generally speaking. So this is highly debated in the addiction world. I know that there's a whole bunch of people working on this outside of Oregon. I imagine there's people in Oregon working on addiction too. But it's going to be complicated. I know people who are still going to AA meetings, and then they have to be secret about their psychedelic use, and they're even healing from psychedelics. They have to keep it quiet, or they're going to lose friends, family, etc. This is my it's a problem with prohibition. It's a problem with shame, because it's kind of like a collectively agreed upon shame item in AA. Yeah, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think that there will be, I mean, 12-step program officially, I think that's, is it proprietary information like that? Is there, maybe not.
In the 12-step, it's, I actually don't know the structure.
To like pay to call yourself a 12-step program.
I hope not.
Yeah, but I know there are a number of people who are intending to open, retreat centers that focus on, substance abuse disorder type of treatment. And, some of those could be fairly lengthy retreats, people coming from all over the world conceivably to do like a multi-week long retreat where, you're taking psilocybin as an adjunct to that. And, that's, I think that will almost certainly, I can say that will certainly exist in Oregon. Particularly that recent federal funding came available for the smoking cessation with psilocybin studies. So like I think it's inevitable that it will happen, whether it's, officially 12-step. I imagine though that will happen. But, that's part of the excitement. So I think for sure,
Yeah,
there will be those kinds of centers.
yeah. Imagine if like substance use disorders and various other types of behavioral addictions are, dropped through the floor in Oregon, and then you still got New York, like in Florida. And so people are going to be looking at, why is it so low? Oh, this. And then it's going to be kind of an attractor in a way to new laws and regulations. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Hopeful. So this next one here from Leo Russell. Hey, Leo. We are with adaptwashington.org, statewide effort in Washington. You're curious about how the cost of training will not be a barrier for demographic groups who don't have access to funds for the extensive training you are planning. So, Leo, just to be clear, we are not involved in rulemaking. We're commenting on the people who are making rules. But yes, this will require a lot of training, I believe, as it should. So your first part here, there's groups like Rachel Martinez and Eden at Fruiting Bodies Collective, who I think they're members of this advisory committee, right, on inclusion?
Yeah, they are the equity subcommittee. I think
Right.
they're members of that. Yeah.
Psychedelics Today helped sponsor them to get training in our world, to then help them stage for inclusion in kind of like queer BIPOC specific populations. And I think that's amazing. I'm really excited for them to do that. I hope they have scholarship opportunities. I actually imagine them to be one of the more affordable training options. I can't say much more than that because I don't know. I would hope that the state government can allow for some funds to go to people with low income. But have you heard any conversations like this around training?
Sort of. So there's equity. So equity is really sort of deeply integrated into the measure. It's kind of at the core of Measure 109 is equity considerations, and the balancing act that they kind of have to make is between, on the one hand, having it be a program that trains people enough to make sure that people know how to do effective harm reduction and harm avoidance, not just reduction, but complete avoidance in situations like that.
Thank you.
And is that Gary?
Yeah, I'm gonna go let another attorney in, so we'll have even more commentary. Are you comfortable just keeping going here?
Yeah.
With questions?
Yeah,
Great.
totally. So so this is balancing act, and if you make it too cheap, essentially, and cheap is defined by, how much, from a business side of it, how much effort has to go in, how many hours the program has to put into to developing the training curriculum and the training program itself. So, if it's cheaper, that maybe people aren't as well trained. If it's more expensive, maybe they're better, more trained. And there's probably the sweet spot where it's the appropriate amount of training. And, so, that's kind of the delicate balance that they're trying to solve. And, with the question is what's, they don't want to require more than is necessary, but they also don't want to give short shrift to that either. So, the question about, if big, so the question is, I'm also curious if you're worried about the influence of big business being oozed and manipulating the outcome. Does that feel ethical? Curious about your thoughts. That's a really complex issue. And I think probably everybody would have their own way where they draw that line. I think I was a part of, I used to be an anti-nuclear activist in another lifetime. And I was at this conference one time where we were talking about how we can go to a carbon-free, nuclear-free energy system. And there was this, enormous debate that had erupted in the room about whether we needed to basically socialize in the energy grid, or whether to displace capitalism, or whether we should just quickly, because we have this urgent crisis of climate and of environmental impacts, we don't have time to make the shift to a more kind of egalitarian economic model. But we're in an environmental crisis. So the question is, do we just accept the pushing it into a capitalist system because there's an urgent need for it? Or do we, try to do it to delay and solve the kind of capitalist problem before we basically allow like lawful psychedelic use? And I think reasonable minds can fall different ways on that question. And in my personal sense is that's a much bigger thorny problem. And whoa, what could we have here?
You'll see in a second, everybody, but Gary Michael Smith, Esquire, author of Psychedelic Alexis, joined us.
Are you guys actually live?
Oh yeah, we're live, ready to go.
Live.
So we're answering questions now.
Gary on the house.
Yeah.
Let me be like doubly gracious and point out that I'm not only an uninvited guest, but I brought guests.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, wow. So this is the first time Joe or I or Gary or I or Joe and Gary have ever, whoa.
Oh my goodness.
Very wow, check this out. Very wow.
Outstanding.
So what do we have for questions?
We just got into kind of the accessibility and expense of courses, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And there's some things around equity and inclusion that are obviously big deals, and pressure from big businesses coming in. Sure. Oh, cool. You added the molecules. That's that's great.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Trying out a wacky version of my law firm's logo with the psychedelics.
Cool. So where are we at, John?
Yeah. So we got another question. I wonder how expensive training will be. That's anybody's guess. Joe was talking earlier about Fooding Bodies Collective, and I think they specifically, I know of them, and I suspect and hope that there are others that are trying to have a really low cost training just to keep it affordable and accessible. Because the less student debt people have by the time they graduate, the less they are forced to charge people later.
Yeah.
So
and what are we looking at? 125 hours of training, roughly?
I think that's the recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to compare to the cost of law school and what it takes to pay that back.
Right. And our training, 47 hours,
Yeah.
roughly 1,600 US.
Yeah, imagine that. You can get to a career in a fraction of the cost and time.
Right. And you've got people, you're healing people. Well, maybe the FDA won't like us saying that, but you're helping people make massive change. And you didn't have to get an undergrad. You could do this 125-hour program.
Yeah.
That's less than a yoga teacher certification.
And if there were more of you, there might be fewer of us.
They make it's a strong point.
Yeah, we'll mushroom our way out of a law practice.
Scroll.
Right.
Yeah, folks, if you want to add comments or questions, feel free. You can use the Q&A or this chat function.
Okay. So I don't think people who are looking at this later will be able to see.
Right. So we can just kind of lightly read it if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Really good point. Nothing about us without us. I am our whole association membership and board are/have been PWLLE, people with living experience. It is absolutely crucial that this movement, as with the marijuana and heroin, compassionate clubs, etc., be led by, or at the very least be meaningfully and legitimately engaged/allied at every level of discussion and present/included at every table. It's from Gina. So yeah, that is, this is super important that we build an inclusive movement. And, as we're three kind of white males here in this room, and it's not, we always acknowledge, we try to always acknowledge privilege, and that we always have more work to do and can do and need to do, and being more inclusive across all, all lines, gender, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national origin, race, ethnicity, all of it. And that is a very well pointed critique of the state of not only the psychedelic movement, but the world more at large. And certainly we have a lot of room for improvement. So yeah, that's one of the things I'm excited to like particularly like about Fruiting Bodies Collective, is that they're working on that issue as that's kind of pretty central to their identity, as it should be, I think, central to all of our kind of values and ethos as we're doing this work, to make sure that it's inclusive and welcoming and safe for all people. Let's see, here's another, in the social advocacy, social justice activism on the executive board. Appreciate finding out what's happening in your neck of the woods with regard to this movement. Thank you for putting this together. I join you in solidarity from across the border in Canada. Thank you, Gina.
Canada's got plenty of interesting action.
Yeah.
And Sasquatch.
Well, Oregon's got a lot of Sasquatch too.
Oh man.
That's what we call them in Kansas. Okay. Yeah, what I think that probably
Kind of hit them all.
I believe we have hit pretty
Well,
much.
please feel free to throw us more questions. We got about 15 left. And Gary, I'm kind of curious about what are you really interested in or excited in about Oregon right now? Is there any one facet that's more interesting to you than others?
I'm just loving watching the process and having Jon be in the middle of it all and being able to talk to Jon is fantastic. Is this? I should probably talk that way for the folks listening at home. Sorry. You should all just look at the back of my head while I talk. Good lawyer skills. Never turn away from the jury, by the way. For anybody going to court, even if you don't have a lawyer, here's a free tip. Always look at the jury when you're talking.
Here we
Not legal advice.
Here we said we weren't giving legal advice.
That's not legal advice. That's keeping your ass out of jail advice.
Nice. I like that.
But yeah, the thing that's really great right now is Oregon is really the model right now for the whole nation. Nobody else is doing this. This is the first time a statewide initiative has been undertaken to create some sort of program that has the ability to grant access to everybody, as opposed to just the extremely wealthy and privileged, which is unfortunately a current byproduct of what's happening with what's going down the medical model and FDA route. And it's nobody's fault on that side. It's just the economics of it. So, I mean, Oregon's opportunity to bring this within literally everybody's reach, that's the magic. So watching how these regulations get created and what works and what doesn't, and be clear, there's going to be failures, guaranteed. The regulations at the end will have flaws. Just be prepared for that because it's new. You have to find out what works, what doesn't.
Yeah.
You can change laws too. You can improve these things over time,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, and look, I'm speaking from experience of having a decade of law practice in Arizona, where I've been wrestling with our marijuana laws there the whole time. And those rules and regulations perpetually evolve. Nowhere near today, it looks like 10 years ago. They're very different rules. We grow as the program grows, and things will change.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of a lot of the law being done through administrative rule rather than statute, is that the health authority can, in theory, go quickly and amend without having to go through the entire legislative process every time they realize that there's something that needs to be adjusted a little bit. So,
yeah, and that's a good point too. For people who get like really angry, like, oh, is it taking too long, or oh, they're not giving me what I want. Resist the temptation to want really rigid statutes, because that leaves very little room for the agency to maneuver and navigate for you.
Assuming you trust
poorly
your
written
agency.
statute can lock you into a bad place for a long time.
Yeah, assuming you trust your agency.
Valid, but at least with an agency, if it's not going correct, you have some potential for remedy, including being able to sue that agency if you think they're going off message. And by off message, I mean outside of what the statutes permit or direct them to do.
Yeah, so we got another question. Who will be excluded from doing the training? What if you have a felony? What if you have a mental health diagnosis? Great question. So the rules on this aren't totally known yet, of course, but there is going to be a character and fitness background kind of check that will likely include review of criminal history. And it's not clear to what extent that will be like a firm disqualifier. There was talk about people with certain types of convictions around sexual abuse. Maybe those are not the people we necessarily want to be facilitators.
I can think of a few.
Yeah, that's come up very recently. Yeah, thanks to again to Will Hall for.
By the way, that's not an insensitive comment from an agency. You guys don't know this, but I also have 30 years of a career doing construction law, in addition to psychedelics and weed. Weird combo, to be sure. But yeah, like even regulatory agencies that license contractors look at that stuff. And I've had a few cases of trying to help people with some severe criminal records just get a license to be a contractor.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. They not even trusted to swing a hammer because your record was that bad. So this is a real thing.
Incredible. So makes sense. It's, people trying to protect other people through regulatory agencies. It's excellent.
God, yeah. And in the space of having somebody supervise or monitor or moderate a client while they're under the influence of whatever they're taking, that's a very vulnerable spot. And man, to have somebody who's got a clandestine predatory nature about them in the position of authority would be horrendous and a huge liability. So yeah, having a healthy list of exclusion, not a bad thing.
And it might also depend. I mean, I envision, or I'm hoping for a system that will kind of be a sensitive and not just a rigid system that will review those kinds of prior issues. So, for example, as lawyers, we also go through the process of the background checks. And when I was in law school, it was explained to me that if you murdered somebody 20 years ago, but have had a massive rehab and your life's totally changed, and you can show that you've made corrections and that you're a changed person, you may still be able to get a law license. But if you stole something from a convenience store like 3 days ago before you applied for the bar, you might not be able to get licensed. So I'm hoping that the health authority kind of has a flexible approach that really takes into consideration the person's narrative and story and why they may have done that. But
well, the simple solution to that is have a list of criteria, including a list of exclusion. And if somebody wants to apply for the credential and they're not granted it, just have some method by which they can appeal the denial.
Yeah.
Gives them a chance. They can make their pitch to a judge. And if the judge is convinced, great, you get the credential. If not, okay.
Yeah, the other question is there any kind of talk about a mental health diagnosis might be a disqualifier from becoming a facilitator? And I've not heard anything about that. I would be really surprised if they put in something like that. But that's, a lot of this stuff, like I said, it's rules and process. So, these are the best information I think that exists as of now. We've got a comment from Jim. Appreciate the offer to do regular updates. How do I find or connect to those? Joe.
Well, subscribe to Psychedelics Today all over the place. They're largely going to be delivered in webinar format like this. We will also be broadcasting them on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, other places as well, I'm sure. So, just stay tuned on all our stuff, and this is where you'll find it. This is going to be Psychedelics Today Media contributing to the Oregon cause.
Yeah.
Pronounced Oregon, right?
Oregon, not Oregon.
Yeah.
No. It's just like Nevada. It's Colorado. Nope.
It's Nevada. Yeah, I like that.
New York. New York.
But it's Missouri.
Yeah. So yeah, stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot. We've got a few other surprise attorneys we'll be adding in time, I hope. And there's just so much room for creativity, problem solving, helping people. So much room for all this stuff here with what's going to happen in Oregon. I can't wait. I'm really excited. Just the idea of domestic, somewhat legal mushrooms is extraordinary. I'm kind of curious about banking.
Yeah.
Have we gotten there yet? We lived through it with cannabis almost.
No, it's going to have 100% all the same problems with banking and tax. So for kids at home who don't know this, there's this ornery tax regulation. It's IRS regulation 280E. Basically stands for the proposition that cannabis businesses or any business engaged in a trafficking of a Schedule I substance, they don't get to take business write-offs like literally every other business takes. So literally every single one of those dispensaries you see around the country, they don't get to write off the payroll, the pens, the pencils, none of it. They pay effectively 3 times the tax that every other business pays. So it makes it very, 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 very expensive to run those businesses. As much as they take in a lot of money, they're also shelling out a lot of tax. Unfortunately, these future psychedelics business companies, what have you, if they're not through an FDA approved drug and DEA rescheduled substance, they're going to be facing 280E. And also resultingly, because we're still talking illegal Schedule I substances, they're not going to be able to bank conventionally. They're going to have to hunt and beg around and hope to find maybe a small local or regional bank that is brave enough to roll the dice, because the risks the bank faces includes, amongst other things, being literally accused, charged, and convicted of facilitating narcotics trafficking, which fetches RICO charges and you name it. And if you're a Bank of America out there, hungry as you are for those deposits, yeah, you're way too afraid to touch them right now.
Have we seen those charges in the last handful of years in cannabis domestically?
Thankfully, no. The banks have been really kind of very smart in how they go about it. I can tell you in Arizona, the banks that do touch cannabis will limit the number of depositors from the industry so that they're not tipping too many flags. They are, of course, being absolutely fastidious about all the different filings. Cannabis is an all-cash business. And whenever you are dealing with a bank in all cash, anything above $10,000 inbound or outbound requires a suspicious activity report be filled out every time. So these guys are, at the bank 2 or 3 times a day filling these things out.
I know some of those people.
Yeah,
I got to do that once. It was pretty interesting.
yeah, and I mean the banks that do it, they're happy to do it because, oh my God, are they charging premium fees for the service? They're making out like fat cats. But that's the thing. As soon as federal relaxation happens, all those little regional banks are going to be crying, because I think all the money is going to get sucked up into the big, nationally chartered banks.
John, is there any rumor or speculation in Oregon about people trying to start these kinds of banks ahead of time?
Well, we already have, I think, 2 credit unions that are willing to do business with marijuana companies.
Okay.
And, whether those, I expect that they likely, go and do work with psilocybin as well. But that's been a topic of great interest amongst a lot of us in the kind of there's a small group of people who attend most of or all of the meetings, and we have kind of our own kind of chat room that our friend Evie Neely put together, that we kind of talk, bounce ideas back and forth and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of us that are really curious about it, and it will be a significant problem, particularly for people who don't have deep pockets or venture capital backing them. It makes it challenging on a number of different levels. And again, that goes to the accessibility issue. Is if it's only people, if that barrier to entry is that high, it keeps a lot of people out, which also means that the people who get there are probably going to want to make return on their investment when they get there, and it's going to be outrageously expensive. So that issue hasn't been really satisfactorily resolved yet, but there is talk about it, but there's nothing nothing promising or encouraging about that conversation as of yet, other than just the fact that maybe and it poses particular problems, because if you have like a New York resident who wants to come to Oregon to take psilocybin at a retreat center or facility, how are they going to get their money over to that facility to reserve their room if the facility can't bank? So that's a big problem. And how are they going to put a deposit? And what if if they're not depositing money, then they're not really firmly committed to showing up, and it just creates a whole kind of host of problems that that could have yet to be. There's not yet like a great way of resolving that, so far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and there are some solutions to some of this, but they're horrendous solutions. Like, for example, there are, and I'm not kidding, this is true. There are merchant banking services, like out of the Balkans, that they will absolutely offer you merchant banking services for your dispensary or whatever. The catch is, and again, no exaggeration, they're charging 20% off the top for every transaction. So yeah, if you're willing to pay that, sure, you can take credit cards too. But oh my God. And oh, by the way, your money will be in a bank in the Balkans. So if that concerns you at all, a little bit.
They haven't had a war in a few years.
Yeah. So, there's that kind of problem. But there are solutions, they're just not great.
So for people who are struggling to maybe understand this and connect the dots, it's not just about the Oregon 109 that makes these things tough to deal with. There's all sorts of other accessory topics that feed into this inaccessibility topic. It's not just the law. It's not just that big businesses are entering. It's because of the drug war and because of issues with banking and all this other junk that's gonna cause us all a lot of heartburn. So just stay tuned.
For sure.
What else do we have in the comments, John?
Yeah. So
just a couple minutes left, everybody.
FYI, core funding comes from, okay, so this is Gina again. She says, PWLLE, peers as someone has coined us. Our expertise and inclusion in these discussions are necessary, as it is precisely the criminalization, marginalization, and stigmatization of the very folks who will be / want to consume / access products and services makes it that much more important. That is a wonderful point. And, to me, there's always this harkens back to the drug war and how, the people who have been, of course, we always acknowledge our kind of indigenous, the tradition and history of that, and that we owe even the discovery of psilocybin mushrooms to indigenous folks. But for those of us in the West, kind of the so-called Western world, it's been people on the underground who have been kind of the stewards of that type of tradition for a long time. And as they've taken great risks personally, legally, for themselves and their families to kind of carry this, there's a question of what tie-in, what role do they have to play, and how is the, a legal framework going to treat folks who have kind of those types of histories. And I think, as the war on drugs is starting to sort of, it appears tentatively, cautiously, gradually wind down, that's, we're getting past some of that stigmatization that I think has long followed, and we're definitely far from there now, but we're think making good strides, and so I think it is critical that we have those voices in this conversation. I will say that there have been a number of underground facilitators that have presented to the advisory board and have been guests, invited to come and present and talk. And I think that it's great that Oregon is open to that and not just taking university researcher types, but trying to get as wide of a perspective on the issue as it really practically can.
Important.
Can I add also, it's critically important that if you care about this, get involved. You need to understand that there are some factors within the industrial world of psychedelics, the folks who are trying to pursue patents and get FDA approval and all that, who would just as soon exclude all of you. And they don't want to have anybody have access to these psychedelics other than through them. They want to be the choke point and the exclusive provider. And they're out there and they're real and they're predatory and they need to be stopped. And being passive and quiet is not going to stop them. It's actually tacitly giving them permission. And they're actively at work now. Just go look at the patents that are being registered. That's all you need to see to know what's going on. And it's far worse than that. So
Excited to talk to some of them later today.
yeah. And I'm on a panel tomorrow talking about this from the other side. So anyway, I can't say enough. If you care about this and you care about having free open access at a grassroots level, you need to be some pretty loud grass.
Right on. All right, everybody. I think that's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
I think we're going to do this, about every 2 weeks, Joe?
I think as of right now, yeah, every other week. We'll see if it goes more than that.
I crashed the party by accident. Don't look for me, folks.
It's a happy accident.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.